How many drawings had he pinned to these walls, only to take them down again? Park Min-jun, 70 years old and newly retired from a lifetime of shaping concrete and steel into habitable geometries, stood in the center of his living room. The late autumn sunlight, weak and watery, slanted through the meticulously clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the only sign of life in the apartment overlooking a quiet sloping street in Songbuk-dong. Order reigned. Cushions on the sofa were plumped and aligned with architectural precision. Books on the shelves stood sentinel, spines perfectly flush. Yet the silence was a tangible thing, a pressure against his eardrums, amplifying the hollow echo in his chest where purpose used to reside. He glanced at the phone, lying inert on the polished side table. His thumb hovered over the contact labelled Seo-yeon, daughter, his only child. 35 years old, a struggling ceramic artist living across Seoul in Yeonnam-dong, a world away in spirit if not distance. He'd tried calling earlier. The brief exchange had been excruciatingly familiar. Polite, distant questions about health, monosyllabic answers. An awkward pause, stretching into an abyss before a hasty, mumbled excuse about needing to check her kiln concluded the call. Each failed connection chipped another piece from the fragile bridge between them, a bridge his late wife, Soo-hyun, had so effortlessly maintained. Now, 5 years after her passing, only crumbling pylons remained. Min-jun turned away from the phone, his eyes catching sight of a rolled-up blueprint on his old drafting table in the corner, a relic of his former life. He'd unrolled it earlier, seeking solace in the familiar lines and calculations of a library he'd designed decades ago. But the crisp paper, the precise ink, offered no comfort now. They felt like artifacts from a different existence, irrelevant hieroglyphs. From his window he saw Mrs. Bay from downstairs laughing with her son, their arms linked as they walked towards the local market, their easy warmth a stark contrast to the chill that permeated his own meticulously ordered space. Loneliness wasn't just an absence, it was an active presence, cold and sharp. A few days later, the pressure of the silence became unbearable. It was compounded by an encounter with a former colleague, Park Chol-soo, who, with well-meaning clumsiness, had remarked, "Min-jun-si, you must keep busy. Retirement is a dangerous time. Find a hobby. Join a club." The words, meant kindly, had felt like sandpaper on raw nerves. Keep busy? His life had been nothing but busy. Now the emptiness yawned. Driven by a vague, uncomfortable mix of Chol-soo's prodding and his own gnawing solitude, Min-jun found himself standing hesitantly outside the local community welfare centre, the cheerful sign seeming almost offensively bright against the grey November sky. He'd intended to find something solitary, structured, a history lecture, perhaps, something that required listening, not interacting. But as he stepped inside the surprisingly bustling entrance hall, filled with the low murmur of conversation and the scent of kimchi stew wafting from the cafeteria, he nearly collided with a woman organising pamphlets at a small table. She looked up, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a warm smile that seemed to instantly soften the room's institutional edges. She appeared to be in her late 60s, with neatly permed hair and an air of gentle competence. "Oh, excuse me," she said, her voice pleasant. "Are you looking for something?" Min-jun cleared his throat, feeling suddenly awkward. "Ah, yes. I was inquiring about lectures." "History, perhaps?" The woman tilted her head, her gaze observant but kind. "We do have lectures, of course, but have you considered our life storytelling workshop? We just started a new session. It's a wonderful way to organise one's thoughts from a long life, put things in perspective." She gestured towards a pamphlet with a simple drawing of an open book. Lee Yoon-ji, her name tag read, "Volunteer Coordinator. Organise thoughts." The phrase snagged Min-jun's architect brain. Structure. Order. Perhaps this wasn't just sentimental nonsense. Perhaps there was a logic to it he hadn't considered. Reluctantly, feeling slightly foolish, he took the pamphlet. "Storytelling," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. "I will consider it." The first workshop session was excruciating. Min-jun sat rigidly on a plastic chair in a brightly lit room, surrounded by a dozen other seniors, mostly women, who seemed to chatter and share with an ease he found baffling. They spoke of childhood memories, wartime hardships, the joys and sorrows of raising children. Their stories tumbled out messy, emotional, illogical. When it was his turn to introduce himself and share a brief memory, He offered a dry, factual account of winning a university design competition. He mentioned the building's structural innovations, the challenges of the site's gradient. He finished speaking to a polite, slightly confused silence. He felt a prickle of defensive irritation. Why share vulnerabilities with strangers? It served no practical purpose. He noticed one woman dabbing her eyes as another spoke of a lost sibling. He mentally critiqued the narrative flaws in a rambling anecdote about a troublesome neighbour. This was unstructured, inefficient. Yet he couldn't deny a sliver of something else beneath the discomfort, a faint, unfamiliar pull towards the raw humanity in the room. He watched Li Yunji navigate the session. She didn't dominate, but guided. When someone struggled to articulate a feeling, she offered a gentle prompt. "It sounds like that was a very frustrating time for you." When one man spoke dismissively of his wife's worries, Yunji subtly reframed it later in a general comment. "Sometimes, acknowledging the effort someone puts into caring for us, even if we don't always agree with their worries, can make a big difference." Minjun filed the observation away, an interesting variable in the unpredictable equation of human interaction. The workshop stirred something in him, a low hum of dissatisfaction with his own emotional landscape. The chasm between him and So-yeon felt wider than ever. He had to try something. Remembering Yunji's implicit point about acknowledging effort, and perhaps misinterpreting the original story's emphasis on specificity, he decided to visit So-yeon's studio in Yeonnam-dong. Maybe if he showed appreciation for her work, specifically, she would soften. He arrived unannounced, a habit he now dimly recognized might be unwelcome. So-yeon was unloading bisqueware from her small kiln, her face smudged with clay, her usual tense energy heightened. Her studio was creative chaos, dusty shelves crammed with pots in various stages, bags of clay slumped against walls, the earthy scent of damp earth mingling with the faint metallic tang of glaze chemicals. It was the antithesis of his own ordered world. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Surprise, tinged with wariness. He looked around, searching for something specific to praise. His eyes landed on a set of mugs. "So-yeona," he began, his voice stiffer than intended. "These mugs, the glaze application is technically competent. Very even." He paused, then added, trying for constructive specificity. "But the handle proportions here, they seem slightly unbalanced, perhaps derivative of classic Joseon forms, but lacking their inherent grace." The light in So-yeon's eyes extinguished, replaced by a familiar, weary resentment. "Right, technical competence. Flaws. Thank you, Dad. You always know exactly what to point out." She turned back to her kiln, her shoulders rigid. "I'm really busy right now." Dismissed. He retreated, the short subway ride back to Songbuk-dong filled with a familiar blend of frustration and helplessness. He'd tried to be specific, hadn't he? He'd focused on the work, the tangible object. Why did it always go wrong? Emotions were illogical, treacherous terrain. Maybe connection was simply beyond his design capabilities. He felt the walls of his apartment closing in, the silence pressing down once more. He almost skipped the next workshop session, the sting of failure still fresh. He did go, however, driven by a stubbornness he didn't fully understand. He sat silently through most of it, observing. Yunji, perhaps sensing his withdrawal, didn't push him. But during a discussion prompted by a theme of regrets, an elderly man spoke haltingly about losing touch with his son after a bitter argument years ago. "I was too proud," the man whispered, his voice thick. "Too stubborn to see his side. Now, it might be too late." The words resonated uncomfortably within Minjun. Too proud. Too stubborn. Images flashed through his mind. A teenage So-yeon, eyes bright with passion, showing him her first ceramic sculpture. Him pointing out the structural instability. So-yeon, older, tentatively mentioning her decision to pursue art full-time. Him lecturing her on financial insecurity. His wife, Soo-hyun, gently trying to mediate. Him dismissing her concerns as overly emotional. He saw, with a painful clarity he'd always avoided, his own role in building the wall between himself and his daughter. It wasn't just her reluctance, it was his critical gaze, his withheld approval, his fear masked as practicality. Later that evening, staring at his phone, the usual paralysis gripped him. But the old man's regret echoed. He couldn't offer a grand gesture, it wasn't in his nature. But maybe. Something small. He typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, He sent a simple text message, focusing not on her work, but on her effort, connecting it to a shared positive memory, however distant. "Soyana! Heard the Hongdae Free Market is this weekend. Must be stressful getting ready. Remembering how happy you looked building that enormous sandcastle at Handae Beach when you were little. Hope the preparations go well." He stared at the screen, his heart pounding ridiculously. Minutes stretched. Then a notification bubble popped up. "Thanks, Dad, it is busy." The sandcastle was pretty epic. It wasn't effusive, it wasn't a breakthrough, but it wasn't rejection. It was neutral. Surprised, perhaps. A tiny crack in the wall. He saved the message, a small blueprint for a different kind of structure. That small text exchange became a catalyst. Min-jun started approaching the workshop, and his life, with the cautious precision of an architect tackling a new, unfamiliar material, human connection. He began consciously observing the techniques Yoonji modeled and others occasionally employed. He started an internal log, reframing his own negative thoughts. "Because I'm retired, I'm stuck here." Became "thanks to retirement, I have the opportunity to learn something entirely new." Secret 1. Positive framing. He forced himself to listen more actively during the workshop, not just waiting for his turn or mentally critiquing, but trying to understand the feeling behind the words. He even risked a small interaction. When Mrs. Choi, a quiet woman, spoke about her difficulty tending her rooftop garden after a knee operation, Min-jun, remembering Yoonji's emphasis on acknowledging effort, murmured, "It sounds like you put a lot of care into those plants, Mrs. Choi. It must be frustrating not to be able to manage them as you'd like." Secret 2, acknowledging effort, empathy. She gave him a surprised, grateful smile. It felt strangely rewarding. He started keeping a small, plain notebook, jotting down observations, not about structural integrity, but about conversational dynamics. Eun-ji rephrased Mr. Kim's complaint as a statement of his need. Mrs. Park used "I feel" when disagreeing. He analysed interactions like complex joinery, searching for the principles that made them hold together or fall apart. He was still awkward, still prone to retreating into silence, but he was trying. He was learning the language, the syntax of the heart. His internal antagonist, that voice of cynicism and critical distance, still whispered doubts, but its volume was slowly decreasing. The real test came unexpectedly several weeks later, as winter began to tighten its grip on Seoul. Min-jun's phone rang late one evening. It was Seo-yeon. Her voice was tight, choked with tears. "Dad, the kiln. It malfunctioned. Everything, weeks of work for the gallery deadline, it's all ruined. Cracked, melted, a disaster." Min-jun's first instinct, the old architect reflex, was to ask for details. What was the temperature curve? Was the controller faulty? Had she calibrated the pyrometer recently? He physically bit back the questions. He heard the raw pain in her voice, the sheer devastation. This wasn't a technical problem to be solved. It was a wound to be acknowledged. "Seo-yeon," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "That sounds truly awful. I'm so sorry." He paused, searching for the right words, the ones that weren't about fixing, but about feeling. "I can only imagine how much work you poured into those pieces. To lose it all like this, it must be devastating." Secret 2 and 5, acknowledging effort and understanding perspective. Silence on the other end, broken only by a shaky breath. "It is," she whispered. "I'm coming over," he said simply, not asking permission. The drive to Yeonam-dong felt long. He rehearsed phrases in his head, discarding analytical comments, focusing on empathy. When he arrived, the scene in the small studio was one of utter desolation. Shards of broken pottery littered the floor around the kiln. Glaze had run and fused pieces together in grotesque shapes. Seo-yeon sat slumped on a stool, tear tracks cutting paths through the clay dust on her cheeks. He didn't bustle. He didn't offer solutions. He walked over, carefully stepping around the debris, and simply stood beside her. He looked at the wreckage, then at his daughter. "I see," he said softly. "I see the work that was lost." He hesitated, then drew on a memory, not of success, but of failure. "There was a project, a community centre design, early in my career. A structural miscalculation, my fault entirely, caused major delays, huge cost overruns. I thought my career was over before it began." He looked at her directly. It felt like this. Like everything had shattered, showing vulnerability. He didn't elaborate. He just let the shared experience hang in the air. Then He quietly found a dustpan and brush. Without a word, he began carefully sweeping up the larger shards. So-yeon watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she picked up another brush and joined him. They worked in silence for a long time, the only sounds the scrape of bristles on concrete and the occasional clink of broken ceramic. As they were finishing, So-yeon leaned heavily against the workbench, exhausted. Min-jun reached out, hesitated, then placed a hand awkwardly on her shoulder, a gesture of physical comfort so rare between them it felt monumental. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch for just a second, a fleeting moment of connection amidst the ruins. Secret 3. Gentle action, support. In that shared silence, cleaning up the tangible mess, some of the intangible mess between them seemed to clear too. Months passed. Winter's harsh grip loosened, yielding to the tentative warmth of early spring. Pale sunlight, stronger now, fell across the table in a small cafe near So-yeon's studio. Min-jun and his daughter met there regularly now, usually once a week. The conversations weren't always smooth. Decades of miscommunication couldn't be erased overnight. But they were. Open, marked by a mutual effort neither had been capable of before. "So, the gallery owner liked the new sketches?" Min-jun asked, taking a sip of his Americano. So-yeon nodded, a genuine smile touching her lips. She did, especially the tall vases with the celadon glaze. She thinks they have a quiet strength. She looked at him, a hint of challenge in her eyes. "What do you think?" The old Min-jun would have offered a critique, however well-intentioned. The new Min-jun paused, considering. He recalled the sketches she'd shown him last week. "I think," he said carefully, meeting her gaze, "the lines in those vast sketches have a beautiful, elegant flow. They feel both grounded and aspiring. The specific curve near the lip, it's very graceful. Secret 4, specific positive expression." So-yeon's smile widened, losing its defensive edge. "Thanks, Dad." He still attended the life storytelling workshop. He was no longer the silent, critical observer. He remained a man of fewer words than most, his contributions still thoughtful and precise, but now imbued with a quiet vulnerability and a willingness to connect. He occasionally shared reflections on his own journey, his struggles with expressing emotion, finding nods of understanding from the others. He'd even developed a quiet camaraderie with a few members, exchanging greetings, sharing brief observations about the changing seasons or a particularly good batch of kimchi jjigae in the cafeteria. Back in his Songbuk-dong apartment, the order remained, but the silence felt different, less oppressive, more peaceful. On the shelf where a framed architectural award once stood, there now sat a small ceramic cup. It was one of So-yeon's pieces, not technically perfect, the glaze slightly uneven near the base, a testament to its hand-thrown nature. He used it every morning for his barley tea. It felt warm and solid in his hands. He looked out the window, watching the first tentative green buds appear on the trees lining the street. He understood now that communication wasn't a perfect, rigid structure to be designed and built flawlessly. It was more like tending a garden, requiring patience, attention, understanding the soil, the other person's perspective, providing the right conditions, empathy, positive framing, and gentle cultivation, specific encouragement, careful requests. It required acknowledging that growth, like the seasons, happened gradually, with setbacks and unexpected blossoms. He, Park Min-jun, the architect of concrete and steel, was slowly, painstakingly learning to build bridges of a different kind. Fragile, imperfect, but infinitely more vital. The work was ongoing, but in the quiet satisfaction of connection rediscovered, he had finally found a blueprint for peace in the architecture of his own heart.